Okay, thanks very much. I'll just stop the title slide now. Okay, so thanks for everyone for registering and coming along today. As I mentioned before, I'm Naeem. I'm events coordinator for GIG, and I'm also chairing the session today. And I'm not going to talk for too long, but just to give you a bit of background, this is a follow-up to a webinar we did last year, which featured 4 members of the Government Information Group committee talking about their work with government information, which went really well. And we had a suggestion from one of the attendees that it would be a really good idea to repeat the exercise but with different speakers. So here we are. Yeah, so we have 3 different presentations here from people in the civil service working across different information professions, including librarianship, information management, and information rights. Yeah, before we kick off, there should be time afterwards for questions. So we're happy to kind of take questions from attendees. We're using the Q&A function, hopefully, if it works. So either you should be able to see a button at the bottom of your screen, or alternatively, I think if you click on the More button, you should be able to see the Q&A there. If you want to kind of submit your questions via that, that'd be great. Although I'll be keeping an eye on the chat as well. But just to get started, our first speaker is Tim Hayward, who is lead Freedom of Information business partner at the recently renamed Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government, and he's going to give us an overview of Freedom of Information legislation and processes. So I'll just have his slides here, which I'm going to load up. Just give me a second. Okay, I'll just share those. Is that coming through?
Yeah, that's good, Naeem. Thanks.
No problem.
All good.
Okay, so feel free to get started.
We'll get started then. So yes, as Naeem's just said, I'm Tim Hayward. I'm a lead FOI business partner at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. And we have 2 main headquarter buildings, one which we share with the Home Office and DEFRA in Marsham Street in London, and one also in Wolverhampton. We also have lots of regional offices that operate as sort of governmental hubs. So places like Newcastle, Doncaster, Warrington, Plymouth, and so on. So we're quite widely spread across the UK. Our Secretary of State is Angela Rayner, the Deputy Prime Minister, and she's supported by a couple of Ministers of State, several Parliamentary Under-Secretaries of State, and of course a lot of civil servants. And I think it's fair to say that the department has quite a wide policy remit these days. So we're basically responsible for all housing, planning, legislation and policy development, as well as all things local government and of course building safety. I've been in the FOI team now for about 8 years, and before that I worked in a range of policy jobs across the department, mainly in housing and planning policy, also in fire and resilience policy, when that was with one of our predecessor departments. Before that, I worked at the University of Wales in Aberystwyth, where I did my librarianship qualification. So today, our Freedom of Information and Data Protection team consists of about 18 people. Half of us work on the data protection side of things. The other half work on FOI. And we're, in terms of corporate structure, we work at the centre of the organisation in the Strategy and Private Office Directorate. Many government departments across government operate their freedom of information requests in a way in which they're centralised, as we do. So there's a business partner model. So we will handle all the casework, right from when a request comes in to when it goes to appeal, if it does, and so on. So we don't need to actually go out to the business areas for information and to check on sensitivity of that information. I think next slide, please, Naeem. Okay, so what's freedom of information all about? Okay, freedom of information gives people the right to see any information they ask for, unless it's exempt. And colleagues will often say to us when we say, well, do you hold any information on this, that, or the other? And they'll say, well, we can't give this out, and we never release this sort of thing, and so on. But under the Act, people have the right to ask for any information, unless, of course, there's an exemption, and I'll come to those later on. So any request for recorded information is covered by the Act. It has to be recorded information. We'll often have people writing in with questions. They'll say, on this, that, or the other policy, what is the government? Why has the government done this, that, or the other? We don't tend to deal with those as freedom of information requests. They'd have to be dealt with as sort of business as usual correspondence. So it has to be a request for recorded information that the department holds. And the Act gives us 20 working days in which to respond. So that's in effect the statutory deadline. Next slide, please, Naeem. Okay, I've just mentioned recorded information. Well, what is recorded information? It's basically all departmental business, anything to do with housing, planning, building safety, whatever that we write about or speak about is included in that definition. So that is even when you're using your own phone, your own Gmail accounts, which obviously is discouraged for security reasons, Twitter, WhatsApp, and so on. So it's anything to do with departmental business that is recorded information, and that can be requested. Next slide, please, Naeem. Okay, I thought it might be a good idea to mention the environmental information regulations at this point. Most people will be aware of the Freedom of Information Act and what that means. The environmental information regulations are actually a parallel information access regime, and they're European regulations rather than a UK statutory designation. And Section 39 of the Freedom of Information Act actually makes it an obligation to disclose any environmental information under the regs rather than under FOI. So this is sort of information, anything to do with environment, anything to do with climate, water. Because our department deals with an awful lot of planning requests and information, then we'll deal with that under EIR. Okay, I just thought I'd mention the parallel information access regime there. Next slide, please. So going back to FOIA again, these are our duties under the Act. We have to confirm or deny that we hold the information requested. We have to give that information to the applicant, unless there's an exemption, and I'll come to those in a minute. And we have to provide advice and assistance to the requester as necessary. Okay, next, Naeem, please. Okay, and these are typical FOI exemptions under the Act that we often use. We often get requests for, say, house building statistics that are routinely published. So if we get a request along those lines, we refuse it, citing Section 21 of the Act, which is information that's already published, and then point the requester to give the requester a link that would take them to that information. So trying to be as helpful as possible, basically. Section 22 of the Act we often use as well, and that's information which is due to be published. We don't have to give a date for that, but we can refuse the request if it's, for example, if there's statistical information that's undergoing a lot of quality checks before publication, then we can cite that exemption to refuse it. Section 40 of the Act covers personal data. We use that quite a lot. And confidential information, Section 41 of the Act, used quite a lot as well. Okay, next slide, please, Naeem. Okay, so a couple of the other key exemptions. Section 35 of the Act is applicable only to central government departments. And this is something we use, I would say, the majority of the time, if information is to be withheld. And it relates essentially to the formulation of government policy. And that includes legal advice to ministers, operation of ministerial private office, and so on. But basically, it's the formulation and development of government policy. Interestingly, this is what's called a qualified exemption. So it means that even if the exemption is engaged, we have to carry out what's called a public interest test to sort of weigh up the balance between transparency and withholding the information. And often, what gives weight to withholding the information is that the policy will still be live. Ministers still have to make a decision. Legislation may still be going through Parliament, and so on. So Section 35, qualified exemption. Other exemptions are what are called absolute, such as Section 40, the personal data exemption I just mentioned. Okay, next one, please, Naeem. So Section 36 of the Act is quite a strong, effective exemption should information want to be withheld. And this is information where it would be prejudicial to the effective conduct of public affairs if it was released. And to ensure that exemptions engage, we have to get what's called the reasonable opinion of a qualified person. And in central government, a qualified person is a minister. So I've just put two pictures there of our recent appointed ministers, Matthew Pennycook, who's the Housing and Planning Minister, and Jim McMahon, who's the local government minister. So we'd have to put up advice to these ministers and get them to sign a form to say that they agreed. So that's central government. If other public authorities like local authorities, the qualified person would probably be the chief executive or someone like that. At a university, it would probably be the vice chancellor, but that person has to agree that the release of the information would be prejudicial to the effective conduct of public affairs. Okay, next one, please, Naeem. Okay, these aren't exemptions, but they're other responses that we can give. Obviously, if we don't hold the information, then we can just say we don't hold it. If it's too time-consuming, then we can engage Section 12, And in central government, that means that it'll take more than 24 hours to locate, retrieve and extract the information. If we do an estimate, if we think it's going to take more than 24 hours, then we can refuse it. But the Act does require us to give advice and assistance then to the requester in how they can actually narrow the request to make it more manageable. Section 14 is a similar exemption. It relates to burden, and also where we think someone's sort of being obsessive about asking us questions or being generally unpleasant and so on. We've had one or two of those. Next one, please, Naeem. Okay, so if the requester isn't happy with our response, there's quite a lengthy appeals process. So in the first instance, he can come back to us and ask for an internal review of the decision, and then someone else in the team will undertake an internal review. If they're not happy with the internal review, they can put a complaint into the Information Commissioner. The Information Commissioner will undertake quite a forensic examination of the case where we're asked a lot of questions, and they will then issue a decision notice, either agreeing with us or agreeing with the requester. The decision notice has quite a lot of legal weight. If we don't abide by it, then it's considered as contempt of court. So we kind of generally take notice of what the decision notice says. If either ourselves or the requester are unhappy, we can go to the first stage of the tribunal process, which is kind of the first stage of the court process. The case will be overseen by a judge and two lay members on a panel, and then it can go upwards towards the High Court and so on. So it's quite a lengthy appeals process. Okay, and last slide, please, Naeem. Okay, these are just some numbers slightly out of date, actually. Just to give you an idea of the amount of requests we get. In the first quarter of this year, we had 325 information requests, which was up from 260 requests last quarter of last year. And we managed to answer 81% of them on time. I think at the moment we're at about 90%, which is much more in line with what the ICO expect of us. And yeah, 39 requests we handled under the environmental information regs regime during quarter one, which is actually slightly less than we usually do, because as I say, we usually have quite a lot of planning related requests. Okay, and I think that's my last slide. So I'm happy to answer any questions at the end, of course.
Thanks for that, Tim. As some of you on the call will know, I'm a librarian with the Welsh Government, and we do a bit of cataloguing of some of the freedom of information requests that come out here. So from my perspective, it's really interesting to kind of hear from a view from the coalface just how those are handled. So thanks very much for that. And as Tim mentioned, we hopefully should have time for questions afterwards. So feel free to put those queries in. Moving on to our next speaker, we have Newman, who is Information and Data Analysis Manager at Historic England, and he's going to be talking about how his and his team's work fit into that organisation's aims of protecting and promoting England's archaeological and architectural heritage. So, Martin, over to you.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to share now. Right, you should see my first slide now with a nice picture of Castlevig Stone Circle. Do you?
Not quite yet. Sorry, Tim.
Not yet,
hang on,
no.
something to say. It worked when we practiced it earlier, didn't it? Let's try that again. Yeah. Yeah, there we go. I've
Yeah, we
got
got
a
it.
green light around it now. That's much better. Okay. Actually, my job title has changed, but I'll come on to that a bit later. It's changed since I agreed to do this presentation. What seems like an age ago now. So yes, I work for Historic England. It's going to be a very different sort of presentation because rather than focusing on one area, although I will be mentioning FOI, I'm going to talk more generally about what we do at Historic England, the information we have, and how that supports our functions, and I say a bit about what it's like to work here in information management. So I'm sure there'll be some people on the call who don't really know who we are or what we do. In fact, I was speaking to somebody from MHCLG last week who the first part I had to do is explain who Historic England were, because he really didn't have a clue about the historic environment sector or our roles. And I'm sure that's very true of a lot of places. So on the left of the screen there, I've just copied and pasted from our website what it says our role is. And on the right-hand side is my interpretation of what that means and some of the areas we cover. So firstly, we aren't part of central government. We are an arm's length body, and we report into the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. We carry out a lot of statutory functions on behalf of DCMS. Particularly, you'll be aware of listing. DCMS list buildings. We don't, we recommend them to. So we handle all the casework, and then it's up to the minister to make a decision. And they generally side with us over 90% of the time, which is good. We get involved in a lot of planning, both for listed buildings, but also other designations, and I'll say a bit more about it in a minute. We award grants, both to help people look after their historic sites, but also a lot for research, and I'm more involved in that latter part. We do actually do our own research as well. Historic England has independent research organisation status. We create and issue guidance, and that can be everything from installing solar panels on a listed building, replacement windows, specific things like that, to far more general guidance about working with the historic environment. We are a public library and specialist library on the historic environment and public archive. You can make an appointment to come and view archive items in Swindon. All our metadata in catalogue records are online, and some digital pictures as well, but an awful lot of the collection is not digitised. It's a very large collection, and as you go through, you saw a picture of Castlevig stone circle at the beginning. I have illustrated this presentation throughout with images from our archive. Give them a bit of a plug, but also I'm sure you don't want to just read off a slide the whole time. We do a lot of work comms, and it says about championing historic places. That is very much part of the remit of our communication. Now, up on the bottom there, all of this information requires good data. All this work requires good data and information. And data and information is something that underpins all our decision making, whether it's recommending whether a building is listed, a planning case, deciding what areas we want to commission research in, or what applications for research. Do we think this is a valid thing to look into? Is it going to help our aims? So, working in information management at Historic England, that is not a picture of us working on information management in Historic England. That's a picture from our archive, and that's how information management used to be done. Look at two people looking at a very small black and white but very deep monitor from 1992, and that's because we took over the archive from the John Lang photographic collection. and that's Sizewell B nuclear power station. So we manage information we publish. The biggest example of that is National Heritage List for England, which I'm going to mention as a case study in a moment. And we are very much an information-rich organisation. So in addition to the NHLE, there's Heritage at Risk, which we publish every year and is actually listed as an official statistic and comes under the Official Statistics Act. Our annual Heritage Counts publication with all the stats about the historic environment in England. There's all the information and data that comes from our research and also supports our guidance. There's all our collections records, including all our archive catalogue data. So we are very much an information rich organisation. We are heavily involved in setting standards and guidance for information management in the sector. We are part of the Forum on Information Standards in Heritage, together with, and that's UK-wide, and we work with our counterparts in Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland on that, but also other parts, other players in the sector, the Archaeology Data Service, who are based at the University of York, ALGAO, the Association of Local Government Archaeological Officers, to give a couple of examples. And as part, I mentioned ALGAO there, we support the local historic environment records. I don't know if there's anybody on the call who is coming from a local authority, but every local authority will have access to a historic environment record, and they have recently been granted statutory status, although that part of the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act hasn't come into force yet. And there's certain things that need to be in place first, particularly around definitions and standards, and that work is going on at present. Regulatory compliance. We've heard a lot already in this in the previous presentation about FOI and EIR. We do have a specialist team who work in those areas, although I do get involved in FOI and EIR work. In fact, just before I joined this presentation, this event, there was a rather potentially thorny FOI request that came in. I think with an email saying, I think Martin needs to be consulted on that one. I'm thinking, oh no, do I really? No, yes, I fully appreciate some of the complexities that were just being discussed, but I'm also involved in things like the Inspire regulations and how we can form a term which covers spatial information in our GIS system. I keep banging on to people about the reuse of government information regulations 2015 and making sure we're compliant in them by publishing in an open way all the information and data that we should be. And part of that very much comes on to my next point, which is information governance. We are divided into directorates at Historic England, and I sit on our corporate information management group, representing analytics. And there we discuss all of these things around compliance, data security, GDPR, FOI, etc. And recently I've been very heavily involved in our internal digital strategy and also our sector-wide Heritage Information Access Strategy, which we you briefly market as Heritage Information Access Simplified, which is by the 2 words on there. With the digital strategy, I was responsible for a small project to create an information assets register, which is something we need. It supports a lot of our compliance work, but it's also supporting a lot of the other work we're doing around data architecture and the actions from the strategy. It's where we identify the data sets we should be making public, for example. And we're actually looking to publish that in the future ourselves, so we can say to people as an open organisation, this is all the information that we hold, including the information which we would never make public because it's for reasons such as GDPR, but we're saying we've got it. And that's in the process of being redacted for publication at the moment. Also, for the digital strategy, I've been working on a policy for us for our use of persistent identifiers, and also policy on our use of open government licensing. So I'm going to give you a little case study about Natural Heritage List for England. So this is the biggest data set we have, and it brings together the listed buildings, which I'm sure you've all heard of, together with a number of other heritage designations you possibly haven't. Scheduled monuments, which is pretty much the archaeological equivalent of listing. The Register of Historic Parks and Gardens, the Register of Historic Battlefields, protected wreck sites, and World Heritage Sites. And we've got over 40,000 records in total there. And the photograph I took there isn't one from the isn't a photograph from the archive. It's a photograph of part of the archive that I snapped for this presentation, and that's just a small amount of the listed building greenbacks that predate digitization, and we have to keep we do have to keep that paper record and look back on it time to time. Although the digital version is now the official legal version. Before my role changed, actually, I was identified as keeper of the list, which meant at one point I had to give evidence in court to prove a building was listed. Fortunately, because I just had a knee operation and crutches, I didn't have to actually travel halfway across the country to appear in person. They took my evidence in writing. But when somebody decides they want to contest whether the building is listed, we get involved. And this is the single biggest resource on our website. And it pages about listing, whether it's the actual searching the list or applying for listing, etc., account for 60% of all our website views. So it's quite high profile. And one other thing I've been involved with for the digital strategy is our open data hub. And we now publish all the data from that, as well as an increasing number of our data sets on that under an open government license. So a little bit about me. I'm listing some of the things I've been involved with and done, and think, how did I end up here? And I'm sure there's lots of people on the call who actually did want to be librarians, but who actually says, "Oh, I want a big career. I want to be an information manager." I didn't. I was originally an archaeologist, and there's a picture there of some of my colleagues who are still archaeologists. Although I do still call myself an archaeologist. It depends on who I'm talking to. And it very much with this community today, I'm speaking as an information manager with that hat on. So I did a BSc in archaeological sciences. At the time, it was the only archaeological course which was actually doing a science-based BSc. And that included a module over the first 2 years on computing and quantitative methods, and that rather set me on the career path I have today. And then one of my early jobs, I worked in Scheduled Monuments Records Office at what was then English Heritage. I then went to the Royal Commission on the Historical Monuments of England to work as a manager on the project to create a digitized version of all the listed buildings. And that is the origins of the NHLE you see today, because I then worked on combining all those designations together. So not just paper records, but taking information from 5 different legacy systems and putting them into one database and publishing the results online. I mentioned my job had changed since, because quite recently it's changed, and I'm managing a new team which is supporting our data analysis work across historic England. So we actually make sure we have that information at hand to enable staff to make better decisions that inform what we do. Why did I join CILIP? I joined CILIP to work towards a chartership, as I had lots of experience in this area. My only qualifications were as an archaeologist. So I did that so that I could actually have that skill and experience recognised. So probably my last slide, because I was told to keep it to about 10 minutes. What is it like to work in information management at Historic England? Well, firstly, I'll say it's incredibly varied, and I say that in a good way. I know that could be taken in more than one direction. But the number, I hope you get a flavour from some things I talked about already. I deal with a wide range of subject areas, and also the work itself and the information itself. Not just, I think, okay, I'm biased because I'm originally an archaeologist, but I think this stuff is really interesting. The subject matter is interesting. I find his liking to be very supportive of my CPD, and that's supportive of my professional and academic interests. I think that partly is borne out by the fact we do have IRO status, but it's enabled me to publish academically, for example. I'll say, as with all jobs, it can be quite hectic and stressful at moments. I'll give a couple of examples there. So when, say, we get a request on a night, one afternoon, say, there's a question being asked in the House tomorrow from one of the government ministers, and it's they've had a bit more warning this, but eventually it's come around. Oh, we'll ask if Historic England can help us answer that. He needs to know a stat for, and then there's a bit of a panic. And sometimes it's not information we hold, and that's something we have to tell senior management quite a lot. They're asking for something which they can't done, or they don't actually know what they're asking for. They'll ask a question, and we'll get back and clarify that, and say, well, what do you mean by? And then they'll go, oh, I hadn't thought of it that way. So you have to do things. I've got a bit of a reputation in the organisation for saying things like, you can't do that, particularly as I'm a bit of a, ever since studying for my chartership, I got interested in copyright, so I do have a reputation as a bit of a copyright nerd, particularly when it comes to database right, because copyright in database is obviously something I need to know a lot about. And lastly, it's taken me some interesting places, and so you're looking at a picture of a tunnel there. I don't know how many of you know the prehistoric mound Silby Hill, but we had a project a few years ago where we reopened an old 1960s excavation tunnel into it, which was completely backfilled. Well, not intentionally backfilled, collapsed more like. And it had never been properly published. We re-emptied the tunnel, recorded all the sections, and it led to a very good publication. But I was lucky enough to get to visit that while the work was going on and stand in the middle of Silby Hill. Not for everybody, it would be very claustrophobic, and the briefing that they gave you when they gave you the emergency respirator in case the tunnel collapsed was actually quite scary. But it's taken me to some interesting places that aren't normally open to the public. Another one, we gave a series of presentations at Stonehenge for people in relation to our Heritage Crime Initiative, and I was one of the speakers. And that meant I got to stand in the stone circle at Stonehenge after everybody had gone home at sunset, watching a beautiful sunset. So, sometimes there's not many perks in the job, but when you do, they can be quite good. So I think that's my last slide. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Martin.
I should add, I'm about to put in the chat links to a lot of the things I've just talked about, including a number of some of our data standards work as well. So I shall just quickly do that, and you can follow us up if you've been particularly interested in anything I've been saying.
Brilliant. Thanks very much for that. I think there will be a lot of interest, because I know that certainly the architectural and archaeological heritage is something that a lot of people are interested in, and definitely got a flavour of the kind of like the broad range of stuff that you do in your role, which I think is really interesting, and also really interesting, I think, to hear from someone who's kind of like working in the information professions but didn't necessarily have that by background and has that kind of specialist knowledge as well. So I'm sure that everyone found it as fascinating as I did. Okay, so two down. We're now down to our last presentation. Last but certainly not least, we have Belinda Carvalho and Robbie Lumsden, who are librarians with the Department of Work and Pensions. and they're going to be talking about some of the work they do in terms of literature searching for policy development there, and also specifically on some of the experimentation that they've been doing regarding using AI tools for lit searching. So if you want to take it away, feel free to.
Great. Thanks, Naeem. I've really been enjoying the talks as well. I'm Belinda Carvalho, so I've been working as a digital librarian in the Department for Work and Pensions, and I've been in this post for almost 2 years. Before this, I spent 12 years working as a school librarian. I worked across most types of schools during this time. So worked in a religious secondary school, an academy, a comprehensive, and finally a private school. So I was in the private school for 7 years before this job. When I started off working in schools, I completed a graduate trainee post in an inner city secondary school library. So I really, really enjoyed like the work I did there. So I did a lot of like literacy work, working with students. But I also got to support in library lessons, got to do collection management, kind of got to do a bit of everything really. And kind of after that ended, I went from an assistant to do more management roles. Oh, Naeem, do you have the slide? If you wouldn't mind popping that up, please. Thanks. So I went on to do more roles after that, and I was kind of able to grow. During that time, I did my library qualification part-time. I did it via distance learning with Robert Gordon University. So I really enjoyed that and really added to the work I was doing. During my time working in schools, I got a lot of experience in the teaching environment, which was really great. Still get to use that today, which is great. While I was in libraries as well, I got to work a lot with ebooks and implement ebook platforms, and that was really great experience. Really enjoyed using tech in the library and kind of implementing catalogs and kind of working with tech support to kind of make solutions happen, which is great. And then kind of over time, I really wanted to kind of find my next step, which as a school librarian is a bit tricky because I guess you're the main librarian, so there's nowhere to go really. So I kind of wanted to work in like a team and work as part of a bigger organization and like work on more tech projects basically. This actually proved a bit tricky, maybe was a bit unlucky. I applied for several university library jobs, so this is going back kind of 2 to 3 years just before I got the role here. But I always found, even when I was filling in the kind of applications, that my skills were in such a good fit. Often didn't get shortlisted, and I kind of found that like really like kind of hard, and it did dent my professional confidence a bit because I felt I kind of had like a lot to give, or I'd learned a lot from schools, and it was kind of frustrating not to be able to progress. And around that time, I saw some jobs advertised in the civil service, and I said I'd give them a go. And I was surprised that my skills were a better fit for these. I didn't get like the first two I applied for, but I got really great feedback, and that kind of encouraged me. And the way a lot of the civil service applications are, you kind of like practice them as you go along. There's certain things that they like want to have, and I found I could practice them over time. And overall, I found like the kind of application easier than I had with the university ones. It was shorter, it was a bit more concise, and that kind of played to my strengths. And overall, I found the civil service kind of more dynamic in this sense than other library jobs I went to. I felt they were kind of looking at my potential, rather than kind of just what I'd done in my previous roles. And this was quite refreshing. So I'm just going to hand over to my colleague, Robbie, and he's going to discuss kind of his journey.
Hi there. Yeah, so I started at kind of similar time to Belinda, and but before that I'd worked in university libraries for a long time. It's kind of interesting to see Andrew and Belinda say that they had struggled doing applications for university libraries. I can tell you that's because it's a weird knack you have to do to apply for them. That's maybe a sort of training advice that we should give. So I worked there for a long time, but I think I was getting like in a variety of roles, like frontline, managerial for a bit, but then sort of settling on a sort of subject librarian role. And I think even that's quite different from what I necessarily expect, sort of maybe thought about it, what it would be before I came in. It involved a lot of teaching, and that was something we did like a lot for. So I worked for University College London for about 10 years, and then at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh, and then most recently at the University of West Scotland. But I think I was getting quite frustrated kind of with that specific role, but also maybe a bit with universities in general. Like I think, don't know, my impression is there's kind of like quite a lot of like bad vibes in the sector. So I was interested in other avenues, and so when the job came up in civil service, I was really interested. But at the same time, I was a wee bit sort of nervous going in, because I think I just always assumed I would work in universities forever. And but like I think I spoke to the person who would go on to be my manager, and he sort of told me what it was like, and it was sort of surprisingly similar to how a university set up, albeit with kind of different emphasis. So I got the job, and that's and honestly never looked back. So I'll pass back to Belinda for the next bit.
So just a bit about kind of our library in the context we're working in. So Department for Work and Pensions is the second largest government department. We've got over 84,000 staff. So our library kind of serves them. But it also sits within a kind of division which is called Central Analysis and Science Strategy Unit. Bit of a wordful. But this is part of kind of an analytical community, and we support the work and research of social researchers, analysts, statisticians, and basically a lot of people who are doing analysis and creating research. And this is a good fit for the library, and it's helped us to get involved in research projects in the early stages, so we can help colleagues early on. In our team, we have like 13 librarians, and our work involves literature searches, managing web resources, knowledge management, and more traditional library work, such as curating and managing a physical collection. So that's based in Caxton House in London. And we also have a departmental archive, and that's based in Caxton House too. Kind of priorities that we're working on at the moment are like research excellence. So kind of building our research offering and making sure it's like world class. We have a library without walls, so that we're kind of offering an identical user experience for those who are based like elsewhere in our other hubs around the country, and that they can access the content virtually. So I work on a lot of that as a digital librarian. And also knowledge management is another big strand. So developing world-class evidence base for the AC, the analytical community, to support decision making, problem solving, and innovation. And it kind of like make sure that we're kind of in there helping with the problem solving. So as I said, I've mainly been involved in kind of digital work, and I'm currently on a temporary promotion leading on finance and procurement. So I've really enjoyed kind of learning about how to do that in the public sector. And at the moment, I'm learning how to like set up a new contract with a new supplier. And that's been really great. I've really enjoyed kind of working in a team, like I said, from being a solo librarian. It's been a really great chance to learn directly from colleagues. I've had like a lot of mentoring, and I've gained like a lot of skills in this time. So both, especially with digital and with finance. So I've learned a lot on the job, as well as like having a lot of CPD as well. A highlight for me so far has been working directly with some of our social researchers, and kind of pointing out like resources to them, and just working closely with them. And it's been kind of interesting because I have used those skills that I'd cultivated as a school librarian, in terms of showing them resources, demonstrating and everything, which I kind of thought initially before I went in that kind of my school experience or working with younger people mightn't be a good fit, but it's proved really useful. And I'll just hand back to Robbie to talk about his experiences.
Thank you. A couple of the things I say, like I was saying, it's quite similar to university setup, but with a different emphasis, and that different emphasis has been quite interesting and challenging. So an example of that would be in terms of literature searching. So that's something we do where people will commission literature searches from us on a topic that they're researching, and so that was interesting because it was using the skills I'd sort of developed in university libraries, like how to show people how to do a complicated literature search. But then I actually had to then go through the results, which is normally where it stopped for me. So I think I got a really it was a really new insight. I had to learn a lot more about the different subjects, often quite specific things that we're researching. And being able to use those skills to sort of pick out the information. And so that's been a really interesting challenge. The other one that was mentioned sort of at the start was to do with artificial intelligence. And I think with a lot of these things, I mean, people use it differently than I think, as I understand, university students use it. But people do get caught up in like there's a new tools coming out, the new advantages and the new disadvantages. So we have to be quite proactive about this to sort of test the resources that were coming out, produce information videos, and they got like absolutely huge amount of views on our kind of internal sort of video training network. The sort of, training we did on, or the information we did on the sort of, the pitfalls of ChatGPT for research, and also different resources like Elicit. And there are definitely some sort of important advantages of that, but I think our finding was that a lot of them were just a lot more clunky than traditional literature search tools. And so, yeah, it's been sort of taking the lead as the sort of people in the department most who are the kind of have to be the sort of leading the charge in that, because otherwise sort of dangers could come in terms of the research we produce if it's relying on potentially fictitious articles. So yeah, I think Belinda, shall I pass back to you for the last wee bit on our experiences of working in DWP?
Yeah. So we were just going to kind of talk about like kind of how we'd found it as compared to like previous sectors. One thing that has been like a real highlight has kind of been working with various teams across the UK. It's fully national. Well, actually, we don't have a base in Northern Ireland, but other than that, we do have some colleagues from Northern Ireland as well. But it's been really nice to kind of go to meetings in other parts of the country and kind of see how the department as a whole serves the whole country. We also have found it really good in terms of working flexibly. We both work part-time hours and are like parents as well, so it's been really good for work-life balance. Surprisingly more so than working in a school, I found. So that's been really good. I was also going to talk about like if you'd like to work in kind of government information yourself and you're kind of looking at civil service jobs, like information jobs, things that might be useful and that I would have liked to have known at the time. We use like Excel a lot, so really good to kind of brush up on that. SharePoint is kind of one of the main tools we use, and our library runs a knowledge bank. So this has been a really, really big area and a really big part of our work. So if you have an opportunity to learn about that, I'd recommend it. Brushing up on kind of critical writing and reading skills. We seem to use those all the time, so that's really good. Another one, it's probably kind of obvious with it, just came to me during the talk, was like presenting virtually with DWP and a lot of government departments, with them being national. I think you do have to do that a lot.
I was going to say, just in terms of that national thing, like, so I'm based in Glasgow, Belinda's based in London, and I think I found it sort of quite refreshing to work in this kind of dispersed organisation. Obviously has challenges, but I found it very, I feel, even though most of my colleagues are based elsewhere, I feel a lot more included than I think would have been than you might think. And there's also sort of opportunities for a bit of travel, which was very rare in university libraries. It was sort of to get wee trips down to meet my colleagues in the London office. So that's that I found that pleasant. I don't know, other people maybe find it more of an inconvenience, but yeah, it's really interesting and different to work for a national organisation, I think. Yeah, the ability to do that to be part of that while living quite far away from the centre of government is, I think, a really sort of positive thing. I think that's us. I think we've taken up loads of time now. It's meant to be meant to have time for questions. I think we've got 2 minutes for questions, but thank you all.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no worries. Thanks very much, both. Really interesting, in particular, to hear about the kind of transferable skills you found useful in the in sort of going into government libraries. Yeah, unfortunately, we're kind of like a little short of time for questions, but we'll try to at least squeeze 1 or 2 in, I think. Go up. There was a couple for Tim. Okay. Yeah, one for Tim. Does the number of requests increase year on year?
Well, Tim, you're
you're on mute.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd say that I don't have the stats to hand, but that's probably the case. Although it tends to be more cyclical throughout the year. So we had a big surge earlier this year, and it's kind of just dropped off after the election, funnily enough. So yeah, but certainly since the Act came into force, requests have picked up. That's true to say.
Excellent. So I've seen that Belinda has kind of answered a few of the questions in the chat, which is brilliant and really helpful. I think there was one I don't want to pick up. I think actually asking if you could kind of like share some of the stuff that you've done on AI in terms of training materials and that. I'm having trouble picking up the exact question, but yeah, would you mind sharing the materials you produced on AI? So I don't know whether that's doable or not, but
oh, sorry, yeah. So I just put a response. I just put a response in there. I think we aren't able to share. That's another thing that maybe I should say about DWP, about maybe the civil service generally, but it is very locked down in comparison. Very sort of, there's a lot less scope for sharing the material. But if anyone wants to get in touch, I'm happy to sort of talk about it in more broad terms, even if I can't share the specific training material.
No worries. Yeah, the kind of confidentiality and stuff like that is obviously a big issue in government, so that's perfectly understandable. Right, we've just kind of gone past 12:30 now, so I think that's about it. It's probably time to kind of call it a day. But thanks very much to all the presenters for sharing their knowledge and experience with us. Yeah, so just to let you know, we've obviously been recording the session. I will send a link round to everyone who's registered next week with the link to the video. We also have that'll include a link also to a survey. We'd like you to sort of provide your feedback on the event, and also with your ideas for future events. You never know, this came up from an idea that someone had from one of our previous events, so we could sort of like take that forward as well. But I'll just pop the link to that in the chat now. Just belt and braces. But yeah, thanks very much for attending, and I hope you have a good day. Bye now.